The first time folks in Copper Valley heard that Nick Yazzie, an Apache horseman with a reputation carved from dust and hardship, had taken a white school teacher as his wife. The whole town whispered for a week straight. Some said it was a folly. Others called it a scandal. But the truth was far simpler. It was a deal struck under the heat of a dying summer when neither of them had much to hold on to but their pride and a patch of stubborn hope. Judy Turner had lost nearly everything by then. Her parents, the small house her father built by Cottonwood Creek and most of her savings to a railroad company that swallowed land deeds as fast as it laid track. She worked at the schoolhouse earning pennies, but it wasn't enough to keep the county assessor from nailing a notice to her door. Those weeks, the notice said. Those weeks until the land was sold out from under her boots. Nick found her sitting on the porch steps, the paper crushed in her hands, her eyes fixed on some point far off beyond the ridge. It didn't say much because a man like Nick spoke only when words held weight. You can stay, he told her. The land stays in your name if you're married. The county won't touch it. She looked at him, then really looked at the broad shoulders weathered by years of riding mustangs, at the quiet strength in his dark eyes, at the solitude carved into his face like the mesas around them. Married, she repeated, unable to hide the tremor in her voice. For Cho, he added, a contract. Nothing binding past what we agree on. And maybe she should have refused. Maybe she should have said she wasn't desperate enough to marry a Foch hardly knew. A man whose world tangled with Apache traditions she had never dared to step into. But she was desperate. And more than that, there was something gentle about the way Nick stood there, as if he'd carry the whole desert for someone if they asked him softly enough. So she agreed. They married in front of Judge Collins on a mild September afternoon. No vows, no rings, just a handshake between two people who didn't yet realize that some promises bury themselves deeper than words. At first, life settled into a quiet rhythm. Judy cooked, cleaned, tended to the garden near the corral. Nick repaired fencing, broke wild horses, and rode south to trade with old Apache friends. Their conversations were simple weather, chores, the stubbornness of a colt that refused to be saddled. Nothing more, nothing less. But somewhere between those shared silences and the evenings, when the sun washed the valley in warm copper light, Judy found herself watching Nick the way a woman watches something she can't quite name. He moved with a kind of patience uncommon in men out here, steady, deliberate, as though he carried the stories of generations in the quiet strength of his hands. And she wondered sometimes if that steadiness could ever hold her too. Nick, for his part, felt something shift as well. They'd grown up hearing that love was a dangerous thing that had weakened warriors and made fools of men. Yet, when Judy hung to herself while hanging laundry on the line, or when she brushed dust off his shoulders after a long ride without saying a word, something in him stirred like the soft rumble of thunder before a summer storm. Neither of them spoke it, neither dared to. Then came the winter when Ayanna returned. Word spread fast as it always did. The half-Apache girl who once followed Nick through canyons and AOs had come back after years serving as a scout for the U.S. Army. Some said she'd grown into a fierce beauty, quick with a rifle and quicker with a smile. Others whispered she had only ever loved one man, and that man was Nick Yazzie. Judy saw the truth of it the first time Ayanna rode into the corral. Dust rose from her horse's hooves, framing her like some desert apparition. She dismounted with ease, walked straight to Nick, and embraced him with the warmth of someone long belonging to him. Judy felt something inside her both crack and crumble. Ayanna laughed up at him, her hand lingering on his arm. Nick smiled, a smile, rare, but real. Judy had never seen him smile like that for her. Her heart tightened as she watched from the doorway, palms sweating against her apron. It felt foolish, childish almost. Though imagine that their practical marriage could ever have held room for something tender, but she had let herself believe it, even if only in the quiet corners of her heart. And then another misunderstanding took shape in the shadows. Nick passing by the schoolhouse one afternoon saw Judy speaking with a traveling surveyor, a childhood friend who knew her family. The man leaned too close, smiley filing, touching her wrist as he handed her a ledger. Nick didn't stay long enough to hear Judy insist she wasn't interested. He rode off with a coldness, settling over him, convinced Judy had found the affection she never wanted from him. To people in love, two hearts convinced the other belonged elsewhere, saw silence where truth should have been spoken, and wounds where tenderness might have lived. When Judy finally placed the divorce papers on the kitchen table, Nick didn't ask why. He only nodded, jaw tight, and signed his name like a man accepting the sentence he believed he deserved. A week later, she was chi. He didn't know she wept the entire ride to her new lodging. He didn't know she whispered his name each night by the creek, missing a man she thought never wanted her. He didn't know she was carrying the last piece of him beneath her heart, small as a sparrow, fragile as hope. The desert, as it often does, kept both their secrets. For a time, the cabin Judy rented stood alone on the edge of a forgotten creek, where the land sloped down into a shallow basin of mosequite and rabbit brush. It wasn't much. 2 small rooms with a leaky roof and a stove that smoked whenever the wind shifted west, but it was hers. And for the first time since leaving Nick's ranch, she needed something that belonged to no one else. Winter had barely loosened its grip when she learned she was carrying his child. The news came quietly without ceremony, just a late morning, a bit of dizziness, a knowing look from old Donna Ramona, the Mexican midwife who passed through town each month selling herbs, and a whispered confirmation. You are with child. Judy sat down hard on the wooden step outside the cabin, breath hitching, fingers trembling against the small swell that wasn't visible yet, but already felt heavier than any burden she'd ever known. A baby, Nick's baby. For a moment, she let herself imagine his face, his dark eyes softening, the gentleness of his hands, the quiet way he mended fences as though repairing the world one post at a time. She imagined him learning of the child, imagined the look he might wear, but that imagining hurt worse than truth. He didn't love her. He had a Jana now, or maybe always had. And she had nothing to offer him except a heart bruised from hoping. So she told no one. Not Nick, not the townsfolk, not even the surveyor who passed through, asking after lessons and land deeds. She worked alone as her belly grew, mending shirts, baking loaves of bread to sell at the trading post, stitching quilts until her fingers were raw. She bought flour in small sacks, and chopped her own firewood until the ache in her back told her she'd gone too far. Each task took twice as long as before, and the trail into town felt steeper every week. But she endured it. She always had. Meanwhile, far across the dry expanse of the valley, Nick found himself restless. The ranch, so long the center of his life, felt emptier since Judy's departure. He worked from dawn until the last sliver of sun dipped behind the ridge, breaking mustangs until sweat stung his eyes, hoping exhaustion could dull whatever gnawed at him. It didn't. He kept remembering the way Judy would hum while kneading bread, or how she'd wrap a shawl around her shoulders before stepping out into the cold. He remembered her laughter, rare but soft and warm, and the way her eyes brightened when she spoke of the children she taught. But every memory twisted into something bitter when he pictured her with that man outside the schoolhouse. Her smile, her hand brushing his sleeve. Nick tried to bury that image, yet it returned again and again, poisoning the affection he'd never dared speak out loud. Breathe so ingrained in him. He sometimes mistook it for instinct, pulled him away from the truth that haunted him. He wanted her. He had wanted her long before the contract, long before the divorce, and he hadn't known how to say it. Ajana saw everything long before Nick did. She'd always been able to read him the way he tensed his jaw. The silence that fell when his thoughts wandered too far. She caught him staring toward the east ridge where Judy's cabin lay hidden behind windswept plains. She heard him murmur her name once in his sleep. Jealousy sharp as flint dug deep into Ayana's ribs. But she did not hate Judy. Not truly. She only hated that she herself had loved Nick for so many years without ever holding his heart. One cool spring morning, Ayana pretended her strength failed her. They had ridden out together to check a group of wild mares near Coyote Pass. Used as Nick leaned over to adjust the reins on his new stallion, she clutched her stomach, gasped, and slumped forward dramatically. Nick, she rasped. I can't breathe. Startled, he leapt from the saddle, ready to catch her. But she waved him back with trembling. I'm dizzy, she whispered. I can't ride alone. Please take me to the medicine man near Red Creek. Nick hesitated only long enough to gauge her face, pale, strained, convincing before offering his hand. Come on, you can ride behind me. She let him help her up and once seated slid her arms around his waist. The warmth of him, the familiar scent of leather and dust, filled her with a painful sense of belonging that wasn't hers to claim. Yet she held on anyway. Cheek pressed lightly to his shoulder. Nick guided the stallion across the desert, unaware of the small secret smile forming at the corner of Aana's lips. She felt his heart beat through her palms. She felt his breath steady as he murmured to the horse. But she did not feel triumph, only a hollow echo. Because even then, even with her pressed close to him, Nick remained distant, his mind somewhere she could not reach. He didn't notice her glances nor her fingers tightening around him. He didn't notice the way she said his name. He noticed only one thing, only one person. Rather, when they passed through the open-air market of Red Creek, a woman carrying firewood, a worn dress brushing against the dust, a belly round beneath the fabric, Judy. And just like that, all of Aana's plans unraveled in silence. The Red Creek market was nothing more than a scatter of wooden stalls and canvas awnings pitched against the wind. But on that late spring afternoon, it bustled with noise. Merchants calling price, horses snorting at the scent of fresh hay, women bartering for coffee beans and calico cloth, dust lifted in light swirls beneath the sun, catching on coats and skirts as though the desert itself was whispering through the crowd. Nick guided his stallion through the narrow path between the booths. Aana still pressed against his back, her arms around him in a hold she pretended was born of weakness. Nick barely felt it. His mind had wandered too far into its own storm. It was thinking of Judy again, of the last words they exchanged, flat and empty as a dying fire. He had convinced himself that what they had shared had been nothing more than convenience for her, obligation for him. Breathe insisted it had been right to let her go. But then something tugged at him faint at first, like the prickle of a distant memory. A shift of movement in the corner of his vision, a shape he knew as well as he knew the outline of the mountains at dusk. It turned and time halted. There she was, Judy. She stood beside a stall selling dried mosquite and soap root bundles, a stack of firewood balanced in her arms. Her dress, faded from too many washings, stretched tight around her swollen belly, round and unmistakably heavy with child. Wind lifted strands of her pale hair from her cheek as she shifted the weight of the wood, pausing to steady herself with a slow, careful breath. The sight hit Nick like a rifle shot. For a moment, he could only stare, stand, silent, the world shrinking to the space between his heartbeat and the dust at her feet. Judy Turner, pregnant. Far along 6 months, 7. Nick, Aana murmured weakly behind him, tightening her hold. Are we close to the medicine man? But Nick couldn't answer. His throat closed as something sharp twisted in line him. He almost called Judy's name, but she didn't look up, didn't see him, didn't even glance toward the road where he sat frozen in the saddle. She just shifted the wood in her arms again and walked past him slow, careful steps, the kind of steps a woman takes when her back aches from carrying more weight than her body was meant for. Nick watched her go, his pulse unsteady. Then quiet, quieter than a breath, bitter as mesquite smoke, he let out a sound he hardly recognized as his own, a laugh without jaw. A surrendering sigh fused with something raw. So she did find someone, he whispered under his breath. Married quick, did she? The words scraped his throat. Aana stiffened behind him, sensing his attention had turned elsewhere. Nick forced his gaze away, jaw tightening until the muscles throbbed. A husband? Yes, it made sense. It explained everything why Judy had left so easily, why she hadn't hesitated to walk away from the home they had built, why she had looked so strangely calm the day they signed the papers. And her husband, he muttered bitterly, isn't worth much if he lets her buy firewood alone. The bitterness surprised even him. It dug deeper than jealousy, deeper than wounded pride. It felt like betrayal layered atop the top heartbreak. Because for a heartbeat longer than he wanted to admit, Nick had imagined the child might have been his. Impossible now. Or so he told himself. He kicked lightly at the stallion's flank, urging him on. Nick, Aana said again, this time with a trembling edge. Are you angry at me? No, he answered, though the word came hollow. Not you, but she knew better. She had known him since they were children, running barefoot through canyon streams. She recognized the storm settling in him. You saw her, she whispered. There was no point pretending. Yes, Nick replied quietly. Does it trouble you? It didn't speak at first. The lies lined up easily on his tongue. No, it doesn't matter. No, she moved on. No, I never cared that way. But the truth cut sharper. It does, he said at last, more than it should. Ayana closed her eyes. She had hoped that with enough time pressed close to him, the warmth of her arms around his ribs might stir old feelings. But what she'd seen in his face, just a flicker, just a heartbeat, told her the truth she had tried so desperately to deny. Judy still lived inside him. The ride to the medicine man continued in uneasy silence. Ayana no longer leaned into Nick with feigned weakness. Instead, she held herself stiff, wounded by a realization deeper than her jealousy. Nick's thoughts were 1,000 miles away, back in Copper Valley, back in the small cabin where a woman he once nearly loved now carried another man's child. But as the desert unrolled before him, something strange began to gnaw at him. A question first, then a suspicion, then the faint tremor of fear. The timing, the months, Judy's face the day she left. What if no? A shoved the thought aside. A had no right to it, no reason to claim something that clearly wasn't his. Yet the unease burrowed deeper, refusing to be silenced. Behind him, Ayana opened her eyes and whispered a truth even she didn't want to hear. You still love her, Nick. He didn't answer. It didn't need to. The desert wind carried the truth for him. Nick tried to forget what he had seen at the Red Creek market. For several days he rode the length of his ranch, checking fence, counting mares, breaking a Mustang too wild for any hand but his. But nothing, no work, no taste, no sweat could scrape Judy's image from his mind. Her bowed shoulders, the way she shifted the firewood against her hip, the tired, careful steps of a woman carrying far more than her own weight, most of all her belly. It replayed the moment until it carved a hollow ache in his chest. 7 months, maybe 8. If she had conceived after leaving him, the timeline didn't add up. If she had conceived before leaving him. Nick stopped himself hard. His pride fought that thought like a wounded animal, desperate not to feel hope again. Hope was dangerous. Hope made me foolish. But in the days that followed, rumors drifted across the valley like ash after a prairie fire. The blacksmith in Copper Valley mentioned seeing Judy buying cloth for swaddling. A passing cattle driver remarked that she lived alone on the far side of the basin. A store clerk told someone at the saloon that Judy Turner wasn't married. Not anymore. Not that anyone knew if those words punched the wind from Nick's lungs the moment they reached him. Not married, he muttered to himself in the barn, gripping the edge of a stall door. Then who? His heart thundered. His thoughts raced. Unless no. He couldn't assume that. He couldn't claim something without knowing the truth. But God help him. He needed to know. Even Ayana sensed something had happened. Her face pinched when she saw him saddling his best horse at dawn. You're going. After her, she said softly, though her voice held a tremor she couldn't hide. Nick tightened the cinch, eyes fixed on the horizon. I need answers. Answers, she repeated. Or closure. He didn't reply, but his silence told her everything. Ayana looked away, shoulders sinking. She had fought a battle that was lost long before she joined it. And though jealousy burned her, she found no cruelty in her heart, only so. Go then, she whispered. But whatever truth waits for you, Nick, face it with honor. He nodded once, mounted, and rode west. The trail to Judy's cabin wound through sagebrush and weathered rock, dotted with bleached cattle bones, and the wind-warped remains of an old wagon. A spin cloud skated across the sky in long gray streaks. Nick pushed through them, riding hard. When he reached the basin, he slowed. Her cabin stood small against the rising slope roof, patched with scrap tin, smoke curling from the chimney. A line of laundry flapped in the wind, baby linens, tiny and soft, stirring something fierce and safely inside him. It dismounted, heart pounding so hard he felt it in his throat. Judy stepped out onto the porch, then carrying a bucket half full of creek water. She froze when she saw him. Her eyes widened blue and bright even in exhaustion. Wind tugged at her hair. One hand pressed instinctively to her side near the swell of her stomach. Nick's voice came low. Ralph. Judy. She set the bucket down carefully, jaw tightening. What are you doing here, Nick? I came. I swallowed hard. I came to talk. There is nothing left to talk about. Maybe not, but I need to hear it from you. I need to hear the truth. Her chin lifted, guarded. About what? About the child. A long silence is stretched between them, taut as a wire. Judy's fingers curled slightly over her stomach, protective. Her eyes sparked with something fierce fear. Breathing and heartbreak tangled together. It's none of your concern, she said quietly. Nick stepped closer, boots crunching on dry grass. It is, he answered. If she was conceived before the divorce, then stop, her voice cracked. Used to stop, Nick, he halted, breath caught. Judy squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, fighting tears that threatened to escape. I'm managing on my own, she whispered. I've been doing it just fine. I don't need you storming back here out of guilt or confusion. This isn't guilt. What else would it be? She snapped, voice trembling. You made it clear enough you loved someone else. You made it clear enough that our marriage was never meant to be anything real. So why not? Why come here? Nick stared at her, stunned. You thought I loved Anna? She's been in love with you for years. Judy answered. Anyone with eyes can see it. And the way you looked at her when she arrived. You left before you ever asked, Nick cut in sharply before either of us asked the right questions. She flinched but stood her ground. Nick lowered his voice, steady but shaking at the edges. Judy, is the child mine? Her breath hitched. She looked away to the creek, the laundry line, anywhere but his face. Silence answered before her lips did. Nick exhaled slowly, the sound almost a groan. It is mine, he said. Not a question, an understanding. And you've been alone all this time. Judy's shoulders sagged. When she spoke, her voice was barely above the rustle of cottonwood leaves. I didn't tell you because I thought you had already found the life you wanted with her. She lifted a trembling hand toward him. And I couldn't bear to be a burden. Not again. Nick stepped closer, slow, reverent, as if approaching a wounded animal. You were never a burden. Her eyes filled, shining like sunlight on water. And you, she whispered. You left so easily. I thought you wanted to be free of me. I didn't want to be free, Nick said. I wanted you, and I was too damn proud to say it. The truth, raw, latte, fragile, hung between them, like a fragile leaf suspended over a canyon. For a moment, neither breathed. Nick's voice softened as he reached out, not touching her yet, just letting his hand hover near hers. You shouldn't be carrying water alone. You shouldn't be chopping wood or walking to town in your condition, Judy. If I had known. But you didn't, she said, and that's the reality we live with now. Nick finally let his fingers brush the back of her hand light as a prayer. Let me help, he said. Let me try. Let me make this right. Her lips trembled. But she didn't pull away. Nick, I don't know if I can trust you again. Then let me earn it, he replied. Not with words, with every day I have left. But the desert wind swept softly around them, carrying the scent of sage and the unspoken beginning of something long overdue. In the days that followed, Nick returned to Judy's homestead again and again. At first, she refused to open the door. She would watch him through the thin lace curtain, his tall silhouette standing on the porch like a shadow carved from patience. Sometimes he brought nothing but himself. Other times he left small offerings by the door, a bundle of cedar for the stove, a patch of dried choke cherries, a jar of salve for aching joints made by his great-aunt's hand. He never knocked more than once. He never called her name. He simply waited long enough for her to know he was there, then left without complaint. And slowly the walls around her heart built in hurt and fear began to thin. One morning she opened the door before he could step away. Leave it, she murmured, nodding toward the firewood he carried. Nick set the bundle down carefully as though it were something fragile. You shouldn't be splitting logs with the baby coming soon. Judy folded her arms over her belly. I manage. I know, he said softly. You always have. Something in his voice, quiet admiration wrapped in regret, pulled at her like a tide. She looked away, blinking fast. You don't have to keep coming here. I know that, though, he replied. But I will, unless you tell me to stop. She didn't tell him. Not that day, nor the next. By the end of the first week, Nick had replaced the broken roof shingles, patched the holes in her cabin wall, and shoveled the muddy path down to the creek. He did all of it without stepping inside unless invited, always careful to respect lines she wasn't ready to erase. He learned the sound of her footsteps, the way she favored her left side when the child kicked hard, the soft hitch in her breath that meant she was tired, but hiding it. One afternoon he found her struggling to carry a bucket of water. Her face strained, sweat lining her brow. "Let me," he said. "I can do it," she insisted. "I know," he replied, gently lifting the bucket from her grip. "But you don't have to." That simple sentence, "you don't have to," broke something inside her. For months, she'd fought every battle alone, believing no one cared enough to stand beside her. Now here he was, showing up every day, trying to be a man she wasn't sure she could trust, but wanted to. Near sundown one evening, a storm rolled in from the west, carrying thunder like the low growl of a wounded beast. Judy stayed inside, cradling her belly as the wind read the cabin walls. Nick remained on the porch, soaked through, refusing to leave until he knew she'd gone to bed safely. She opened the door at last, irritated and moved all at once. "Nick, for heaven's sake, come inside. You idiot, run out there." He stepped in, dripping water onto the floorboards. Lightning flashed, revealing the tension etched in his face. "I wasn't waiting because I thought you needed timing," he said. He just couldn't walk away. "Not again. Not tonight." Judy froze. A storm light flickered in her eyes. Nick swallowed hard. "He was a fool," he said. "He thought letting you go was mercy. He told myself you'd be happier without me. You leaving made me think my feelings were one-sided." She stared at him, breath caught. "Do you think I didn't care for you?" "He didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't think I deserved to." Silence swelled between them, heavy as the thunder outside. "I left because I thought you loved her," Judy said. "Ajana?" Nick shook his head. "I cared for her like kin, nothing more. And I thought," she hesitated. "I thought I wasn't enough for you." Nick stepped closer, but not too close. He wanted her to feel his words before she felt his hands. "You were more than enough. You were everything I didn't know how to ask for." Her breath trembled. Lightning cracked the sky again. "And the baby," he whispered, voice shaking. "Judy, if you let me, I will spend the rest of my life making up for what you endured alone." She leaned against the table, the weight of months pressing down on her. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said. "You don't have to trust me yet," Nick replied. "You just have to let me show you I can be better." Anna came to Judy's cabin soon after, her steps hesitant, her head held between nervous fingers. Judy stiffened at the sight of her, but Anna bowed her head respectfully. "I owe you truth," she said. "And the apology." Judy didn't speak. Ajana continued, voice soft with regret. "He loved Nick once. Maybe still do a little. But he never looked at me the way he looks at you. He thought if I kept close, he'd remember our childhood. Maybe see me again." She laughed self-consciously, but I was bland and selfish. Judy's throat tightened. She had expected resentment, not honesty. "If I caused you pain," Anna said, voice nearly breaking. "I'm sorry." Truly, Judy felt the sincerity like a warm wind stirring cold ashes. "He don't hate you," she murmured. "He never did." Ajana smiled faintly. "Then take him back. It's been half alive since you left. And the child deserves a whole father, not a ghost wandering the valley." Before Judy could answer, Anna stepped back, fading into the sagebrush like dusk swallowing the plains. 3 nights later, the pain woke her. Sharp, sudden, stealing her breath. The world tilted. Her knees buckled. Nick, who had been sleeping on a bedroll he'd laid out under the porch awning close enough to hear her. If she needed him, leapt at his feet at her cry. He burst through the door. "Judy." Her face was twisted in agony, both hands gripping her belly. "It's happening," she gasped. "Too early, Nick. It hurts." He didn't waste a heartbeat. He wrapped her in his arms, steady but gentle, lifting her against his chest. "I've got you," he whispered, voice trembling yet sure. "I'm here now. I'm not leaving again." The wind howled against the cabin as he carried her out into the night, the storm lantern bobbing wildly beside them. And for the first time since their lives had unraveled, Judy clung to him, not out of necessity, but out of trust, trying to be reborn. The storm had eased by the time Nick reached Donna Ramona's door, though thunder still rolled far off over the mountains. It kicked hard at the frame, calling for the midwife until a lamp flared inside, and the old woman opened up, her shawl wrapped tight around her thin shoulders. "Madre de Dios," she gasped. "Lie her down. Rápido." Nick carried Judy inside, his arms aching, but steady, lowering her onto the cot near the hearth. Her face was pale beneath the flickering firelight, lips trembling as another contraction seized her. He knelt beside her, brushing damp strands of hair from her forehead. "I'm here," he whispered. "Breathe with me." The Ramona moved like a woman half her age, boiling water, arranging blankets, whispering prayers under her breath as she checked Judy's progress. "You are strong, Nya," she murmured to Judy. "But this little one is in a hurry." Judy clenched Nick's hand as a wave of pain surged through her. He felt her nails bite into his skin, but he didn't flinch. He welcomed the pain if it meant she wasn't facing hers alone. Between contractions, she closed her eyes and whispered. "Nick, I'm scared." "I know," he said softly. "But you're not alone. Not ever again." Her breath shook as she opened her eyes. There, beneath the exhaustion and fear, was trust slowly finding its way back to the surface. Hours passed, each one stretching like a river in flood. Nick never left her side. He wiped her brow, whispered steadying words in Apache and English, held her when her strength faltered. When dawn finally cracked the horizon, spilling pale gold through the cabin window, Donna Ramona straightened with a determined nod. "It is time," she said. "Push, now." Judy pushed with everything she had left. Fear, love, heartbreak, hope, every piece of her poured into the moment. And then a cry, thin at first, then stronger, fierce, demanding life. Nick felt the sound hit him like a sunrise breaking open inside his chest. The Ramona lifted the baby small red, bleak, and laid him gently against Judy's chest. "A boy," she said with a proud smile. "Strong lungs." Judy sobbed, half laughing, half crying, her hands trembling as she cradled her son. Nick could only stare, eyes burning, throat tight. He touched the tiny fist curled against Judy's skin. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "Here," Judy said softly, holding the child out to him. "Do you want to?" Nick hesitated. An Apache warrior, a man who had ridden through storms and faced down white men who saw him as less than human, and yet he trembled as he accepted the impossibly small weightage of his son. The infant blinked up at him with dark eyes that mirrored his own. Nick's voice broke. "My son," he murmured. "My little warrior." Judy watched him, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. And in that moment she saw every barrier between them fall away. The pride, the misunderstandings, the silence that had nearly ruined them. This man, this quiet, stubborn, fiercely loyal man, had returned to her not out of duty, but love. Nick stayed through the days of recovery, sleeping on the floor beside Judy's cot, rising whenever the baby cried, learning the rhythms of fatherhood with clumsy tenderness. The first night he held the baby for hours, rocking him gently while Judy slept, whispering stories of his ancestors, of coyote trails and river spirits, of warriors who kept their families safe through winter hardships. Stories he once thought he'd never tell to a child of his own. Judy woke to see him there long before dawn. Her son pressed against his bare chest, warmed by Nick's steady breath. He looked up, startled to be caught. She smiled faintly. "You're good with him," she whispered. Nick shook his head. "I'm learning, but I want to learn for him, for you." Her eyes softened. "I know you do," and something in Saul Haydar finally settled like Saul after rain. A month later, when Judy was strong enough to stand without wavering, Nick truly asked her to marry him. Not in the quiet business-like way of their first union, not as a contract, not as an obligation, but kneeling in the grass near the creek bed, their son cradled in her arms. He spoke from a place deeper than pride. "I want to build a life with you," he said. A home where our son grows knowing he is loved by both his worlds. I was blind before, too afraid to believe I deserved you. But if you say yes, I will spend every day proving that I do. Judy's breath trembled. Her answer came in a whisper soft as the creek's murmur. Yes, Nick. Yes. They married a week later under the cottonwood trees with a simple Apache blessing and a few townsfolk gathered around. Ajana stood at a distance offering a bittersweet smile but genuine warmth in her eyes. She had found her peace, and now so had they. The years that followed unfolded gently, like a long summer evening. Nick rebuilt Judy's cabin into a sturdy ranch house. Judy reopened her teaching work, taking in both white and Apache children, something unheard of in most frontier towns. Their son, who they named Daniel Nisjasi, grew strong and wild-hearted. Running barefoot across the prairie with a laugh that could cut through any storm, Nick cherished him with a fierce devotion, never forgetting the months he'd lost, never allowing another day to slip away ungiven. One quiet evening, Judy found Nick standing on the porch, watching Daniel chase fireflies through the grass. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Nick slipped an arm around her waist, pulling her against him. "That I almost missed all this," he said softly. "You, him. A home worth coming back to." Judy leaned into him, feeling his strength, his warmth, his love steady as the mountains in the distance. "But you didn't," she whispered. "You came back. That's what matters." Nick kissed the crown of her head. "No," he murmured. "What matters is that you let me." The sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky in wild strokes of gold and red colors of endings and beginnings of the two worlds their family would forever belong to. And on that porch, beneath the endless western sky, they stood together, no longer broken pieces of two lives, but one whole one shaped by forgiveness, held together by love. A home born from second chances is a son born of two worlds and a love that refused to